Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all my Solfachord Yugioh deck profile for post Dawn of Majesty. I know I never got around to actually making a Solfachord deck for the release of Ancient Guardians. I just didn't have enough of the stuff to collect. There were a lot of ultra rares to really make the deck work, and needing some higher number ultra rares for them, but finally got around to collecting all of them for the deck. It's a really awesome pendulum deck that focuses on different monster effects based on what pendulum scales you have, if you have an even or odd pendulum scale. So with this setup, it's very easy to just set up a bunch of different Solfachord monsters on the field to make use of the destruction plays, the search power, and just the overall use of the extra deck that you can do with all these different cards. And with the introduction of the Link monster in the newest set, Dawn of Majesty, it just makes the deck that much more stronger. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the monsters for the main deck. We are running 3 of the Solfachord Fansia, with all of them having some pretty simple pendulum effects. This one being pendulum summons of your Solfachord monsters cannot be negated. And while you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord pendulum monster would be destroyed by battle, you can destroy this card instead. And during the main phase, you can add 1 Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up instead of Fansia. You can only use this effect of Fansia once per turn. So it's set up being one of the scale options for the protection of your pendulum summons is another big help. The scale position could be a little better. It could be higher than what it currently is, but being one of the odd pendulum scales, it makes use because balance is one of the best things you need for the deck. For our next 3 we are running 3 Solfachord Yugioh. I would definitely say this is one of the best cards in the deck just for its search power. While you have an even pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, Solfachord pendulum monsters you control gain attack equal to 100 times their own scale. If this card is normal or special summon, you can add 1 Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, except for Solfachord Yugioh. You can only use this effect of Yugioh once per turn. So being a level 1 monster, our only really option for summoning this card out with a pendulum summon would be if we were to have Supreme Gate 0 in the pendulum scale, which we are running the Supreme Gate engine, just because the pendulum monster, Grand Solfachord Majesty, is a monster that needs 2 pendulum monsters, so not even restricted to the Solfachord monsters, but Yugioh more or less helps with that search power, giving us a pendulum monster to just add for more and more monsters we can summon out onto the field using the resources we have in our hand, because unless you have the Link monster set up, there's not much else you can summon from the extra deck. I also run 3 Solfachord Yugioh. While you have an even pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord pendulum monster decks, your opponent cannot activate monster effects until the end of damage step. And if this card is normal or special summon, you can add 1 Solfachord spell or trap from your deck to your hand. So these spell or traps just set up more and more plays for you, whether you use Solfachord Harmonia or your Solfachord Elegance, both being one being a field spell and one being one that just lets you place the different pendulum monsters you run in the deck to the preferred areas on the field. So Yugioh giving you that search power is a big help there for sure. Having a lower scale for some of the higher attack monsters, it works well with the Yugioh setup, being able to get out some of the higher level Solfachord monsters altogether. For the last of the 3 ofs, I also run 3 Solfachord Yugioh. With this one, while you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord pendulum card you control would be destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can destroy this card instead. And if you control a Solfachord card in your pendulum zone, you can special summon this card from your hand. So with it, even if your pendulum scales are a little bit off, you can still summon this card out into the field, meeting the requirements for one of the monsters needed for the Link monster, being your Grand Solfachord Majesty, being the search power for the 2 pendulum monsters there, and just an easy pendulum summon with this card, even if you have some of the lower scales. But it's more here for the special summon, since a lot of our scales don't really go past some of the lower numbers in the deck altogether. And I also, for some of the lower numbers, I run 2 Solfachord Yugioh. 1 quick effect, you can target 1 effect monster your opponent controls, or if you have an even pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, you can target 1 face-up spell or trap your opponent controls, and this turn, banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use this effect of Solfachord Yugioh once per turn, and once per turn at the start of damage step, if this card battles a monster with an equal or higher attack than the lowest pendulum scale in the pendulum zone, destroy that monster. So with it, you have a card to get around some higher attack point monster your opponent opponent controls. I only run 2 of this card, though, because it's more of a card that stops destruction or just destroying cards on the field or negating their effects or banishing them. So you really just need it as a boss monster setup. Being a level 7 monster, we're open to more plays with the extra deck using it, even having the option of going into Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon with our Supreme King Gate 0 when we can pendulum summon them out. Being a level 7 monster, we normally have to have the higher scale, but any of our lower scales will work as well, being the level 7 monster to fit in between those 2 scales for the pendulum summon. I also run 2 of the Solfachord Yugioh. With this one, you can special summon this card from your hand by tributing 2 pendulum monsters, and you can use each of the following effects of Solfachord Yugioh once per turn. You can target 1 face-up card your opponent controls, or up to 2 cards if you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone. Negate its effects until the end of your opponent's turn. And when the effect of a monster on the field is activated with an equal or lower attack than the highest pendulum scale in your pendulum zone times 300, destroy that monster. And this isn't a once per turn either, so being able to use that multiple times on any monster, which the highest scale we can normally get in this deck is 8, so timesing that by 300 is 2400 attack, which can be a good majority of different monsters your opponent may be running in the deck. And having this card, just being able to summon it out with just tributing 2 pendulum monsters, means you can pendulum summon if this card has a pretty high level, being level 8, so normally you won't be able to pendulum summon it out, and then just being able to tribute those cards to get this card out, and then those cards you tributed will go to the extra deck also. And then for the one-ofs for the Solfachord monsters, I run 1 La Solfachord Angelia and 1 Me Solfachord Elitia. More specifics for both of these cards. With the Elitia, if you have an even pendulum scale, you take no damage from battles involving your Solfachord monsters, and you can target 1 spell or trap your opponent controls, return it to the hand. You can only use this effect once per turn. So once again, situational to get around some specific cards your opponent may be locking you out with. And the Angelia, with the option of you can tribute 1 Solfachord pendulum monster, even if face down. If you do, special summon 1 Solfachord pendulum from your deck whose pendulum scale is 2 higher or 2 lower than that monster. So we don't really ever had specifics for the cards being able to get out like this, but the tribute means they'll still go to the extra deck and just give you a stronger monster on the field, with Angelia being able to hit a good number of different cards, whether it be a level 4 or level 8 with its own, or depending on what you have on the field, like Elitia, then being able to hit your Gracia or your Colia. You have plenty of options back and forth with all the different levels for your pendulum monsters in the deck. For more of the engine to run, for more setup of monsters, because once again, the most important thing is setting up your Grand Solfachord Majesty, being able to have the 2 pendulum requirement. So I also run the 3 mythical beast Master Cerberus, and 2 mythical beasts Jackal King for the setup in the pendulum scale. By setting your Cerberus and then being able to set up Jackal on the field gives you the special summon of your monster out onto the field, so without having to take up your normal summon or your pendulum summon, using these cards for that play, and then also being able to have Jackal King on the field with the built-up counters you can use with it to be able to negate your opponent's monster effects, just adds for more and more pressure altogether. And for the last of the Pendulum Engine, I run 3 of the Supreme King Dragon Darkworm and the 1 Supreme King Gate 0. Now, the search power, you can set this card up in the graveyard with some of these spells that we're running, and then special summon it onto the field, giving you the search for the Supreme King Gate 0, which then can be Xyz summoned with our Butea for Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, because once again, like I said, the extra deck is a big part of all the different plays you can do in the deck, but just the special summon of Darkworm gives you, once again, a monster on the field without taking up your normal summon to go into your Link 2 summon of Majesty. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. I run 3 Solfachord Harmonia. It's the field spell. You can activate 1 of these effects. For the deck, you can add 1 face-up Solfachord Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. Increase the pendulum scale of 1 Solfachord card in your pendulum zone by its level this turn. Or if you control a Solfachord Pendulum card with at least 3 different pendulum scales or at least 3 different odd pendulum scales, destroy 1 card your opponent controls. So the destruction all depends on the scale setup. Being able to raise the scale means that you can hit some bigger pendulum summons depending on what you have set up in your scale as well, for that option of increasing the pendulum scale. But what's most important is the fact that you can add 1 face-up pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, so you don't have to be restricted with the limit of being able to only special summon to the extra monster zone if you don't have link arrows to point to. So 3 of this card definitely needs, you always have these ready available options for all your different pendulum play options. I also run 3 Solfachord Elegance. You activate 1 of these effects, you place 1 Solfachord Pendulum from your deck into your pendulum zone, or add 1 Solfachord Pendulum monster from your hand to your extra deck face up, then place 2 Solfachord Pendulum monsters, 1 odd and 1 even, from your deck in your Pendulum zone, or add 2 cards, 1 odd and 1 even, from your Pendulum zone to your extra deck face up, and if you do, draw 2 cards. So basically, getting rid of some pesky cards in your Pendulum scales, which can even be some other monsters you run on the deck. It's not limited to Solfachord cards. You can only activate 1 Solfachord Elegance per turn, but once again, different options depending on the situation you're going into with all your different Solfachord monsters. For more of the setup with Supreme King Darkworm, I also run the 2 Dragon Shrine. Even if you already searched out the Supreme King Gate 0, just being able to, if you have no monsters on the field, send another Darkworm to the graveyard and special summon it, gives you a resource to use on the field as well. We do run a few rank 4s in the extra deck, so being able to overlay into them and then detach Darkworm into the graveyard just gives us more backup options if it were to clear our field again next turn. And for some of the 1-ofs, I run 1 for 1. This is in here for more of the basic search for Yugioh, being able to then have a search off of the monster you added with this card. And I also run 1 Pendulum Treasure. I'm testing out this card for the addition of adding cards to the extra deck more easily from the deck. You add 1 Pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck this turn, face up. You can activate 1 Pendulum Treasure per turn. Or if you didn't want to run this card, you can always run Terraforming as just another additional search for your Solfachord Harmonia. It's player preference at that point. I've been testing out this card, but once again, this could be a Terraforming spot otherwise. And lastly, for these spells, just 1 Foolish Burial, the additional send for Darkworm along with the Dragon Shrine. And also the fact that you can activate 1 Dragon Shrine per turn, and then the 1 Foolish Burial for that setup also. And then moving on now to the traps. The only traps that I run in the deck are 2 Solfachord Musica. You activate one of these effects based on the Pendulum scales of your Solfachord Pendulum monsters you control. If it's odd, you special summon 1 face-up Solfachord Pendulum monster with an odd Pendulum scale from your extra deck. If it's even, special summon 1 face-up Solfachord Pendulum monster with an even scale in your extra deck. Or if it's even and odd, target 1 card your opponent controls, destroy it. So this is just destruction power or more setup on the field depending on the scales you have set up for your Solfachord monsters. I like running it just as a setup to bait out my opponent and then activate it for the play of getting a card and resource on the field to then use against my opponent, especially if I have some more setup with some of my different boss monsters for these Solfachords also. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. For our new monster, we are running 1 of the Grand Solfachord Majesty, with this needing 2 Pendulum monsters. I've said that plenty enough in this video. During your main phase, you can add 1 Pendulum monster from your hand to the extra deck, face up, and 1 face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck to the hand, as long as one of them is an even and one is an odd Pendulum scale. And then also with this card, when you Pendulum summon a Solfachord monster, you can target one of them, add 1 Solfachord Pendulum from your deck to your hand, with whose level equals the Pendulum scale of that monster. You can activate this effect once per turn. So with the different varying scales, like with Butea being a scale 2, it can search out with Dreamia being a scale 7, it can search out Butea, and vice versa with Gracia being a 4, being able to search out your Fancia, and with Fancia being a 5, back and forth with both of the different monsters. So running a good variety of the different Grand Solfachord monsters means they run together for all the different search, including Coolia with your Yugioh. You have all the search power between the 2 and 2s in this deck to use with this card, and it's more setup. And since we don't have Electromite, it's a pretty good replacement just for more Pendulum Link monster plays. I also run the 1 Puzzleomino, the drop-in deleter. This card can help adjust levels of monsters it points to, so if I need a specific level for an extra deck play or a Solfachord monster, this one definitely does come in handy. Barricade Board Blocker for the field spell plays. 1 Nightmare Phoenix for spell and trap destruction. Heat of the Fire Charmer Ablaze. You can run any of the Charmers that you want in the deck for the setup, just having more of a Fancia play setup. I wanted to go with this one for the summon of the Fire Charmer. I also run 1 IP Masquerena for being able to help for more of the extra deck plays for Link monsters. Cross Sheep when I can use and summon out the Xyz and Fusion monsters. Link Karibo for the Yugioh level 1 plays. Nightmare Unicorn. Also 1 Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avermax, and 1 Apollosa Bow of the Goddess to finish off the Link monsters. And for the Xyz monsters, I run 1 Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, 1 Abyss Dweller, and the 1 Tornado Dragon. Like I said, I really like the level 4 plays that work with Darkworm to then go into rank 4s, and the Absolute Dragon when I have the level 7s available, including the King Gate 0, and then our Solfachord option to overlay, and then go into the final monster of the extra deck, which is our Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. Another great card to negate plays against my opponent while I have all the different pendulums built up in the extra deck. As for the go-to plays, it all comes down to just what you're set up in your hand for your Pendulum monsters. If you can successfully set up the Solfachord scales for the Pendulum Summon and get off the plays for setting up your Link monster, you can either summon out a bunch of different, and having the field spell set up for that play to raise the scale, a bunch of different variety of your Solfachord monsters onto the field, especially if you raise the scale of your Cutia, being able to summon out Coolia for those requirements, then giving you more of the play option to go for your Link monster, being the Grand Solfachord Majesty, giving you more of the swap option, but it all comes down to just how many different Pendulum monsters you resolve with, or what you set up with before you even go for the Pendulum scale, with the option to have your Dragon Shrine send your Dark Worm to the graveyard, special summoning it onto the field, giving you the search for your Gate 0, an additional Pendulum monster in the hand to use, and then just even the normal summon of one of your Solfachord monsters. So let's say you go for Cutia. Cutia can give you a search for another Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. Then you can use these two monsters before even setting your scales to set up your Musetia on the field for that play, and then even using your field spell for the option of increasing the scale, or even if you have your Elegance to add and set up more scales to use by just placing one in the Pendulum scale to add 2 cards from your Pendulum zones to your extra deck, or going for the add 1 Solfachord Pendulum from your hand to your extra deck, then 2 face-up cards, 1 even and odd from your deck in the Pendulum scale, to then just Pendulum summon back out after adding the correct scales that we spoke of before that you would prefer to set up in the scales after sending one from your hand to the extra deck to then summon back out onto the field for all your different Pendulum plays. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, I wanted to get around to actually making an update to this deck once Ancient Guardians was released, but after seeing that they had a Link monster in the Dawn of Majesty set, I figured it would just be best to wait until we got that card, and luckily I was able to get it quite early as well. But as always, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.